Hey, necrosis. It's only been a few hours since the previous Through the Eyes of Necrosis I recorded. I've had a lot of vodka in me, and I decided to go ahead and record another one and a couple different episode things I've been wanting to do. This one is a solution to a problem no one should have, the epitome of first world problems. So, allow me to explain the scenario. I have my own network, my own internet in this home. I have a roommate who has his own internet, his own router, etc., etc. I VLAN into that connection, and between his router and my switch, there's a VLAN access port, which gives me access but isolated into his network when necessary so that I can administrate it. It also opens up the opportunity for me to be able to offer him services that he doesn't even know he needs. So he runs his computer on Linux Mint. He's not necessarily a Linux guy, he just... I don't know. I don't want to turn this into a whole crazy thing, but I'm not a big fan of Linux and non-Windows operating systems in general, and that's why most of my infrastructure is just running Windows. It just works for me. That's all I'll say on that. As the scenario continues, the roommate purchases a VPN after receiving letters from the ISP, DMCA type stuff. So he gets a VPN provider. In this case, IPVanish. I'm not affiliated, I'm not sponsored, so unless they pay me, don't worry about it. Now, it's a particularly good service, and the Windows client has got some really important features. However, their Linux offering is not there. They don't have a GUI standalone client for the Linux operating systems, instead offering you, log into your account, download one of the open VPNs, and follow instructions on how to set up and connect into it. And that's fine and dandy, except he was hitting an issue where after a few days, the VPN would stop working. And the only solution was to actually remove it and download a new one. And I was able to, by spinning up a VM of Mint, I think I did either Ubuntu or Debian or something, and basically doing the same thing he did, and was able to recreate the problem. It was happening independent of his system. I don't know what was going on, but it wasn't happening with other VPNs when I was testing, so it was a unique circumstance under unknown conditions. I don't know if that's still a problem today. However, I came up with a mad scientist elegant or inelegant solution to it, since I have, hypervisors that can connect into his network and offer him a service. So this stems a little bit off of the previous episode, because I use soft ether on my network and I manage a couple of them, and this is no exception. This is basically my solution to that type of problem, and I call it at this point a VPN chain. There's other terms for it, VPN nesting, VPN cascading, and I think there's others, but I don't know which one it really is. But it basically comes down to the VPN provider has a very good Windows-based client with a Killswitch that he cannot access with his computer. I can start a virtual machine that does use it and benefit from all the features offered with their client, as opposed to just a generic open VPN. And then he, over the local network, can connect into that machine with a VPN that then goes out to the internet and uses it. It's a very unusual solution to uncommon problem. So this is a very edge case thing. You would not normally be doing this, but it does have two benefits essentially. So the first benefit is that even if your operating system you use is not necessarily compatible with it, you have a way of accessing it indirectly. And the other benefit is that you can offer this to other people in the home as well. So I could actually have like 2 or 3 or every household member with access to this service, and it will all tunnel out through the same anonymous VPN provider's connection that's been established. And that can be useful if, let's say you buy a VPN service, but it only permits like one user or something like that. Then that means you can anonymize one computer or one smartphone, and if you want more, then you got to upgrade to a different package or something. So it allows you to all tunnel into the same connection going out, essentially by creating a NAT. And it just appears as one device to the internet and to the provider and to everybody else. But you can have multiple people on the same connection. I have a Linux Mint virtual machine running on one of my servers, and it is already connected into their network. I'm using their network as an example, but I could really have done this just as easily on my own. And VLAN 66 is that network. And I have also spun up a Windows Server 2019. I could have just used the Windows 10. Doesn't really matter as long as the software is compatible. And I didn't change it yet, but I'm going to do that now. But before I do that, let me explain one prerequisite. So over the weekend, I had been running this service for them for almost 2 years, and it worked just fine. And then I redid my internal network, my internal VPN network, and something went wrong, and I could not figure it out. And the long story short for now, because it took me 4 days before I realized what the problem was, or at least a hint as to what the problem was that because I'm running it in a hypervisor, the secure NAT and gateway system does not work as expected if your virtual switch is set to promiscuous mode to accept. So what I mean by that, and this is ESXi, that's the hypervisor I use. It'll look different depending on if you're using, Proxmox or whatever. For like VLAN 66, this is my connection to their network. If I put a virtual machine on this network, it will go out to their network, not to mine. When I'm going out to the internet, it's going to go through their router, not through mine. So it's really cool that I can run a service for them. And when I click on edit settings for VLAN 66 and I go into my security, the promiscuous mode is set to now reject. That's the default. When you're using SoftEther's bridging of adapter feature in a hypervisor, it needs to have promiscuous on in the hypervisor's switch, the virtual switch that it uses. And that significantly breaks this VPN chain in ways I still don't understand why. But I'm not going to go into too much detail. Short answer is I made double networks for everything. And I think my next episode, when I show how to do my home VPN system, I'll go into detail on that. But the short answer is if you're running something like this in a hypervisor in your home, make sure that promiscuous is being rejected on the network adapter. Otherwise, it will not likely work as intended. So here we have our Linux Mint and our Windows Server. Now I went ahead, and this is partially a recreation. And if I click on settings, I have to also put this network adapter out of my network and into theirs. So VLAN 66, boom. This is the non-promiscuous mode. And I'm going to verify that I'm on their network by hitting ipconfig in the command line if it ever opens. So both of these virtual machines are running on 1 core and I believe 4 gigs of RAM. So they're going to run a little slower than normal. I didn't feel like giving them anything more. It doesn't really matter. They're all going to be deleted before the end of the day. But so ipconfig, I can see that it is going, it's got an IP address locally on the .66 subnet, which is their network. And I'm going to minimize this because I'm going to need that IP address later. So this is intended to be a service that is run locally, not to the internet, so they can't connect into it from outside the house. It's only if you're in the network you can connect to it. On the Windows side of the two systems, I'm going to go ahead, I already pre-downloaded. I'm going to install Soft Ether, and it's going to be very similar to what I did in my last episode of Through the Eyes of Necrosis. The only difference is it doesn't require any fancy command line know-how or anything. It's really easy to set this up on Windows itself. You just download it and then run the installer and then start clicking through. We need the server, which is also going to install the manager, and I'm going to manage it through this machine as well locally. It is now installed. I'm going to go ahead and hit finish, and it's started. I'm going to hit connect, and it needs a password. And this is not the one that's deployed for them. Their service is already running and fine and dandy. This one is a simulation, a reenactment with a few different twists. And the server setup is actually going to be very similar to, if not identical to, the previous video that I made, because we do need SecureNet. So I'm going to tell it to do remote access VPN server. I skipped over the DDNS part to help prevent, IP leak information. I don't need to make myself any more exposed than necessary. I'm not going to enable any of these features because we're not going to be using them. And I'm going to disable VPN Azure. In fact, we don't really want this accessible outside, but in their case they can't anyways. They have a residential connection and the ports are all closed, so I don't have to worry about it. I'll create one user. It'll be test, and we're going to close. I have to keep taking breaks every 5 seconds. My nose keeps itching. I'm going nuts. Similar to what I said last time. And typically you would even disable all these listening ports, but in my case it doesn't really matter. But the big thing is we do not want a local bridge setting here. We're not bridging this to any adapters whatsoever. So all we need to do is go into the VPN Virtual Hub Management. I already have a user, so we don't need that. And we're going to hop into here where we have SecureNet. And in this case, I will use the defaults. They're fine. And make sure that when you use SecureNet, you're not using the bridge feature. We're not using the bridge feature, and I don't think it would work very well in this case. So this is all set up, the server part. I have not set up the client VPN yet. I'll do that after I establish a successful connection between the VPN client on the Mint and the server. So similar to my last video, I'm going to do a OpenVPN export of a sample file, and I'm just going to toss it on the desktop. And just like last time, I'm going to be using the layer 3 OpenVPN file. So again, we're doing the remote access. It's going to be a layer 3 protocol instead of the layer 2. And because we're doing this locally, I'm going to actually have to edit the OpenVPN file and change the IP to the local address. And I'm going to do that slightly off camera. I scrolled down to where it was remote, blah, 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 and it's like a softether.net type DDNS that they give you. In our case, we don't want it to go out to the internet and back in. We want it to go to the local network's IP. It's going to go straight through And that reflection typically would take care of that anyways, but I'm going to do it better safe than sorry. And our IP locally is 192.66.196. I just copied it and I'm going to paste it right there. So now when something loads this OpenVPN file, it's going to try and connect locally through this IP on that port. I don't need to configure anything else on it. Now the tricky part is getting that OpenVPN file onto this Linux client. Now, I'm more than happy to admit that I don't know squat about Linux file systems and network sharing, but to help further the cause, I'm going to demonstrate how I would take such a file and transfer it to a roommate's computer under these types of circumstances. And the answer, in my case, is by using TeamViewer. So I already have TeamViewer installed on his computer, and don't worry about trying to connect to this. These machines are going to be deleted before this video even goes live. And I need to run TeamViewer on this computer. I already have the partner ID pre-typed in. I'm just going to hit connect, and I need that password, 774PKB. And that password changes every time. So now I've remoted into the Linux machine off of the Windows machine, running in a virtual machine. Although they're all running in virtual machines. It's very virtual. And I'm going to hit File and Extra and open a file transfer. Off my desktop, I'm going to grab which one is which? The layer 3. And I'm just going to put it in where's his desktop? We'll import it from there. Boom. So I could have set up some sort of network sharing for Linux. Not interested. This is how I would do it in this circumstance, since their network is completely separate from mine. And if I was in a remote location where I'm not connected to their network at all, this would allow me to transfer files independent of any of that BS. So now that I have done the file transfer, we can go ahead and close out a TeamViewer on the Windows server, and we can go ahead and close it out of here. So the first part of this will show you how to set up OpenVPN connections on, well, at least on Linux Mint. And I'm resizing the window so you guys can see what I'm doing, because otherwise my stupid face is in the way. On Linux Mint, we need to click on the network icon down here and network connections. And as far as I remember, by default, it was already available for OpenVPN stuff. We just have to add a new connection. And then in the drop down, go to, not OpenVPN actually, but to import a saved VPN configuration. And hit create. It's going to ask me for the file. We put it on the desktop. It's right there. And there it is. And open. So this is a OpenVPN connection that uses a username and password authentication. So I'm going to go ahead and enter those here. And I shouldn't need to mess with anything. So when I exported the configuration, apart from changing the IP address to be the local IP address, I didn't have to fiddle with anything, which is really cool, because OpenVPN can be a bit of a exercise in whatever. We are going to now hit save, and I think that should do it. Let me close that. And then, yeah, it's got a weird name because I didn't rename that Windows machine, and I just kept the defaults. VPN connection has been successfully established. If I want to verify that, I can take a look into my SoftEther server, manage sessions, and yep, I can see it right here. This is what a connection through OpenVPN would look like in the managed session list. You can see it shows the OpenVPN layer 3. So just to verify, I'm going to open up a console ifconfig. We have a tunnel 0 interface, ton 0, and it's on that .30. The main network card, which is this ENS 160, is still on the original. So the tunnel is, everything looks like it's supposed to. If I ping out to the internet, it works. So the first part is established. We now have a connection via OpenVPN from the Linux computer to the server. Now we need to figure out, and I'm going to maximize this. Now we're going to need to set it up so that we actually have a VPN client on this computer, because any connection going out to the internet from the Linux machine is going through this computer, but this computer is just using the internet of their router, and there's no purpose to that whatsoever. So we don't even need this open anymore. Back in my downloads, I have the client here. I'm going to extract it to a folder. So what I've done is, instead of using like their IPVanish account, I decided to download VPN Gate because it has free anonymous VPNs available, and it works the same way. So the whole principle and concepts are all identical, and in theory this should work exactly the same with pretty much any VPN provider that you would have. I'll show you how that looks in a moment. We are now installed, and you may notice if you watched my previous episode that this looks an awful lot like the SoftEther VPN client, because it is, but it came with a plugin that connects to VPN Gate. I'm going to cancel for a second. I'm going to make a new virtual adapter. Now I want to emphasize, I don't recommend setting this up in most circumstances. This is a very unique edge case, and I definitely don't recommend using a free VPN service like VPN Gate for this. This is only for the purpose of the demonstration, so that I don't have to use their VPN provider to make this video. In the case of SoftEther's VPN Gate, I just have to click here, enable the relay to join, blah, blah, blah. Don't show this message again. I agree to nothing. You're not going to do anything illegal, etc., etc. They do keep logs, so this is not what you would use if you're trying to protect yourself from who knows what kind of nefarious things you'd be doing on the internet, right? So let us pick a provider from, well, just the top of the list, Japan. Connect. So now the Windows computer itself that's running a VPN server is now also connected to a VPN out to the internet. And if we ifconfig again, IP config, my brain's going dead. I can see we are on a local network of the VPN. If I trace route to say 1.1.1.1, we should see a high latency because we're going all the way across the world into theirs, and the client end works. And I could even further verify this. Okay, so that was really slow, but I loaded IP secrets, which shows you what your IP address is, your origin, etc., whatever they can pull out of it. I could also do like a DNS leak test, which is a different web page, but it's unnecessary. All that matters is we have a completely different external IP as far as the internet can see this computer, and it's in Japan. So when I run a ping, my ping is going to be over 100 milliseconds. So when I do other tests later, it'll be very obvious whether or not it's going through that tunnel. And this IP will match the one on theirs. It's boom, VPN server 153. Whatever. So now the question is, now that I made this connection and the other system, the Linux Mint system, is relying on this connection to now get out to the internet, what happens? Well, let's find out. Let's just ping 1.1.1.1. Wow. I can see 148 milliseconds. So it looks as if it works, right? Let's open up our thing. I previously had IP secrets open on this computer. I resized the window intentionally so that it shows the country origin. I'm in Phoenix right now, but if I refresh this, it should now show Japan as well. And if I wanted to be extra safe, I would, after having installed the client, I would like reconnect everything just so its routing tables are all accurate. But let's refresh this. Okay. Yep. And we can see origin Japan. So it's routing us out through Japan for sure, based on the client that this is connected to. I'm going to do one more thing really quick. So when I ping 1.1.1.1, it's going to continuously ping, and we can see like 150, 140 milliseconds, etc. So it's high latency. And what happens if I disconnect? And this is why the free VPN approach is not a good idea, is you can see, I'm going to hit Control C right there. We can stop. Like instantly once I disconnected, it went back to the default route of the server here. So if this is not connected, then it goes through your normal IP on that server. And that's why it's good to have a nice VPN provider, because they will probably have a separate standalone application that has what's called a Killswitch, which means if this gets disconnected, it disables the routes going out to the internet, so it never leaks out your information should you get disconnected. By using this example, I'm not demonstrating that, but if I was, it would basically, what would happen is there'd be no internet. Like the pings would stop. It would have connection to the VPN here on the Mint, because it would still locally have the connection to our local server, but it would have no access to the internet. So that's one of the pros of having the VPN provider and their properly supported application, as opposed to just using their OpenVPN thing. Because if for some reason it got disconnected, then your IP just decides to leak out and it undoes whatever it is you were trying to do. The use case here isn't to completely anonymize the entire computer anyways. That's just a side effect in this case. The main intent was for BitTorrenting and not getting letters from your ISP, because they're watching you and getting letters themselves from people that are, doing their thing. I installed qBittorrent on this Linux Mint ahead of time, although I haven't configured it yet. So for the record, right now we have no connection to the external VPN, but we are still connected to this VPN locally, the Windows machine. There's a reason I like qBittorrent, although it's not exclusive, and there's many other solutions to this. In fact, there's also a Killswitch script that's available for Soft Ether client specifically that'll, kill switch it, but I'm not going to demonstrate that. I haven't tested it. In the case of qBittorrent, I'm going to do, before I do that, let's get a BitTorrent in here, shall we? I've already preloaded the web page for torrents of Linux Mint, and it looks like they're .torrent files, so I'll copy the link address and tell it to open URL. There we go. That's all people use BitTorrents for, is Linux distros. I hate Linux, but that's all we use BitTorrent for. Right? And the first thing I'm doing is just to confirm that, yep, it's downloading it. So even though we are connected to the VPN, but the VPN is not chaining down into another VPN, it has internet access. Now, the particular way to fix this issue, or at least one way, is to actually bind it to the tunnel interface. So in the preferences in advanced, and this would work for any application that natively has an option to bind it to a network interface. So right now, in their advanced options, you can see the first one down here is network interface, and tunnel 0 is our VPN. So if I click on that and I hit OK, and I think it has to restart, so let's just do that to be sure. Now I hit resume. It's going to show stalled for just a moment, and it's downloading. So that isn't what you would want. That's fair. But now let's say we disconnected the VPN. I'm going to come down here. I should resize this. Bam. I cut the VPN connection, and what this means is the Mint is no longer connected to the Windows server, and it should start dying as the average keeps averaging out over that interval. But essentially, it just killed the connection because the Ton Zero interface no longer has internet access, and it has no other alternative route to go. So if for some reason the local Windows server that I would be running stops running for some reason, maybe I rebooted it or it shut down or whatever, then the BitTorrent client itself will not willy-nilly go passing that traffic through to the main network card. So the thing is, this doesn't solve the other problem, which is that our Windows server is not likely to go down. It's being hosted on a local server, and it's being connected to over the local internet. So there's not a lot of room for things to go wrong in comparison to that Windows server going out to its VPN. So this is why I'm stressing that if you do a service like this, that you use one that has a kill switch built into it. Because if this system loses connection to the VPN, it should kill its internet the same way we killed it for the qubit torrent here by binding it to that interface. But that's not going to be the case by vanilla soft ether because there's no kill switch designed. I'm not really going to try testing out the soft ether kill switch, the script that I saw out there, because I've never tried it and I have no use for it. This is not the appropriate application for it, but I'm just stressing that this Windows server needs to have a properly kill switched VPN provider that it connects to. But what matters is basically that any connection the Linux Mint makes into the Windows server locally will share its connection out to the internet, whether it's over, your own router and ISP, or whether it's connected to a VPN, and you need to isolate and solidify this part as well in order to make the whole package complete. Let's just see what it looks like if we were to reconnect this. So right now it's still stalled, but it is what I hit resume. I'm going to tell it to connect back. I don't know if you can see that. Connection has been successfully established. And I think one more cool thing we can do is if I open up Task Manager on the Windows server and go into Performance, you can see the Ethernet adapter being listed here. And right now there's only the one, which is the main network card for this Windows server. And if this ever resumed, maybe I have to hit, oh no, there it goes. Okay, so now it's got some download speed going. You can see the Ethernet speeds are going up here. Now, if I was to connect to server on the VPN client of the chain, the Windows server itself, now we have a second Ethernet thing. It should start rerouting that traffic, or it might require a reconnect. I don't know how quickly this process will take, but there is a time delay between the routes getting changed, but right now it's being told on the Windows server to route through this gateway with a lower metric, and we can see a little bit of activity, but not quite. So let us double check this, because I think active connections will actually remain as they are. Again, that's why a kill switch is necessary, and it's the one thing I'm not demonstrating on this end of the chain. Paused this, and now I'm going to resume it. So it's forming all new connections, and we should see equivalent data going between these two at this point. So there should be a lot of traffic going on both interfaces, meaning it's like if it's sending out a packet, it's going into the Windows server over the local network, and then it goes out through the VPN on the client end. And then likewise, it comes in through the internet over this VPN and hits this server, and then this server sends it where it goes on our Mint system. And at this point, as long as you have a good VPN provider that gives you a kill switch, or you jury-rig something that'll do that, you can actually serve multiple people on the same local network with this one connection out to the internet on the Windows server. And the ISP shouldn't have any problems because you're not offering this service to the open internet either. You're not selling something, you're not hosting a service. This VPN is only accessible through the local area network, and what happens after that, it all just goes out through one IP, so everybody's happy. Would I recommend a solution like this? I'm going to be honest, if you can avoid it, it's best to be avoided, because in order for this client, this Linux Mint desktop to be able to use their anonymous VPN that, let's say, they paid for, they now rely on not just the provider, but they also rely on me, who is now hosting on my server another machine that has to be run in order for it to work, because they're not connecting to their provider of the VPN, they're connecting to me, and I'm connecting to their provider and chaining that connection over. And basically means that you're adding more points for things to go wrong. Now, in many of these providers of VPNs for anonymizing your internet activity, usually they have instructions on how you can VPN your entire router into their VPN. But I find that in most cases, we're usually only depending on a service like that so that we can go and download our Linux ISOs and not get a letter from the ISP. We don't want to anonymize all our traffic because it is usually slower. It's adding also another point of failure, because if I'm going to be playing an online game, well, all my traffic is encrypted. That adds overhead. It's going through another host, and it's going to add latency and cause more problems. And if the VPN disconnects, then I get disconnected. It's just more points of potential failure, so you don't necessarily want to VPN your entire network. But that's another potential option depending on the provider and what options they have available. Usually if there's OpenVPN, then you can connect to OpenVPN as a client. And I do something similar between me and my VPN in Japan, but I have pfSense and I have specialized methods of routing that gateway, so only traffic going to specific IP ranges in Japan get routed over my router, and everything else goes out through the main gateway. That's a bit of an advanced topic, and I might eventually do an episode where I show how I set up a pfSense gateway / OpenVPN client and then route traffic that I want to it without having to install anything on any machine. But the scope of what we're doing here, this is mad science, and I don't think I have anything more I can say. Hopefully that gave you some kind of insight as to some of the madness that you can do when you start doing weird solutions to weird problems. Realistically, the solution I would have gone with would have been either A, quit using Linux Mint if you're not prepared for dealing with Linux problems, That was not really an option. And the second would have been to do what I do, which I have a torrent box. But again, I have a network access storage or file server. I'm able to run a virtual machine that connects with the Killswitch to a VPN provider, and that runs a qubit torrent. And qubit torrent in particular also has a web GUI or web GUI. And I just have a tab in my browser that I can click on and log into it and just paste either torrent file URLs, magnet links, whatever, and the virtual machine does it. If the VPN disconnects, then everything stalls until it reconnects or whatever. I never have to VPN my own machine to use it, and it just does its own thing. There's no intermediary connections going on, no extra points of failure as a result, and it just works the way it needs to work. But since they don't have a file server or a NAS or equivalent, there's really no way for me to be able to provide them with a service like that. And even if I could, I don't know where it would be run because they don't have servers or hypervisors in which to run it. So it was a very unique circumstance edge case with a very unique specific solution. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it's possible and it does work. And I'm going to stress one last time, make sure that this part, the server that's running the VPN server and connecting out, has something that can kill switch. Without that, this is a bad idea.